Some promises are made under starlight, where dreams feel close enough to touch and forever seems like a whispered guarantee. The memory still lived in Kaya Nouvelle's heart like a bittersweet melody, playing on repeat during the quiet moments, when she allowed herself to remember what love used to feel like. 3 years ago, on a yacht floating in the sapphire waters of Biscayne Bay, Brock Whitman had pointed to the constellation Andromeda and sworn that even the stars paled in comparison. To her beauty, the 35-year-old real estate developer had swept 26-year-old Kaya off her feet with the kind of romance that belonged in movies. Helicopter rides over South Beach, private dinners on rooftops overlooking the Miami skyline, and weekend getaways to his family's estate in the Keys. "You're going to be my wife," he had whispered against her ear that night, the salt breeze carrying his words across the water like a sacred vow. "And I'm going to spend every day proving that you're the most precious thing in my world." Kaya had believed him completely. How could she not? Brock Whitman was everything she had never dared to dream of. Successful, charming, devastatingly handsome with his steel-grey eyes and perfectly styled dark hair. He commanded rooms with his presence, closed important deals with a handshake, and had chosen her out of all the women who threw themselves at his feet. Her, a 26-year-old marketing coordinator from Little Haiti, who had grown up sharing a bedroom with her sister Aliyah, while their mother Imani worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. But even then, even in the golden haze of new love, Imani Nouvelle had seen through Brock's polished exterior with the laser precision of a woman who had survived 60 years by trusting her instincts. The afternoon Kaya brought him home to their modest Coral Gables house, the same house Imani had saved for years to buy, with its faded yellow walls and garden full of hibiscus and bougainvillea. Her mother had served him sweet tea on the front porch and studied him like a hawk watching a snake. "Baby girl," Imani had said later that evening as they washed dishes together, her hands still beautiful despite decades of hard work. "That man's eyes don't match his words. I've seen his type before. They love the idea of you until reality sets in." Kaya had laughed it off, drunk on Brock's attention and the way he made her feel like she was floating 3 feet off the ground. "Mama, you worry too much. He loves me for exactly who I am." Imani had dried her hands slowly, her dark eyes reflecting years of wisdom earned through heartbreak and triumph. "Child, I pray to God you're right, but love ain't just pretty words and fancy dinners. Real love shows up when things get difficult, when the world tries to tear you down. That's when you see what a man is really made of." The engagement had been everything a fairy tale should be. Brock had proposed at the Vizcaya Museum during a charity gala, dropping to one knee in front of Miami's elite while a string quartet played Pachelbel's canon. The 3-carat diamond had caught the light from the crystal chandeliers, and everyone had applauded as Kaya said yes through tears of joy. The proposal had made the society pages of the Miami Herald, cementing them as one of the city's most glamorous couples. Their wedding a year later had been the event of the season. 300 guests at the Vizcaya Museum Gardens, with orchids, flown in from Thailand, and a reception that lasted until dawn. Kaya had worn her grandmother's pearls with a custom Vera Wang gown, and Brock had cried when she walked down the aisle. Even Imani had seemed to soften that day, watching her daughter glow with happiness as she danced with her new husband under the stars. For the first few months of marriage, Kaya had lived in a bubble of bliss. Brock had surprised her with weekend trips to New York and Paris, filled their Aventura penthouse with roses every Friday, and told her constantly how lucky he was to have her. She had felt like the luckiest woman alive, waking up every morning in silk sheets next to the man who claimed she was his whole world. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things had begun to change. It started with small comments, observations about her natural hair that he claimed to love but suggested might look more polished, straightened for important events. Mentions of the gym membership he had bought her, just to help you feel your best, baby. Gentle corrections about her laugh being a little loud during dinner parties, or suggestions that she might want to tone down her animated storytelling when his associates were around. Kaya had tried to dismiss these moments. As caring guidance from a man who moved in circles, she was still learning to navigate. After all, Brock's world was one of carefully curated appearances and unspoken rules. Perhaps he was simply trying to help her fit in. But each small critique felt like a paper cut, barely noticeable alone, but collectively beginning to sting. Tonight, as she sat in their living room, waiting for Brock to come home from another late dinner with friends, Kaya found herself studying their wedding photos scattered across the glass coffee table. In every image, she looked radiant, confident, alive with joy. That woman felt like a stranger now. Where had her certainty gone? When had she started second-guessing every outfit, every word, every natural impulse? The sound of Brock's key in the door pulled her from her thoughts. He entered with the purposeful stride of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room, his Armani suit still perfectly pressed despite the late hour. At 37, Brock Whitman remained undeniably handsome. But tonight, Kaya noticed something in his eyes that made her stomach tighten with unease. "How was dinner?" she asked, rising to greet him. "Fine," he replied, accepting her kiss, but seeming distracted. The usual crowd. Same conversations about the same people. Kaya smiled, trying to match his energy. "Maybe we can do something together this weekend." "Actually," Brock interrupted, loosening his tie, "I've been thinking about our anniversary party next month. I want everything to be perfect, Kaya. This is important for my reputation, and I need you to understand that." The way he said it, not our reputation but his, sent a chill down her spine that she couldn't quite explain. Chapter 2. Cracks in Paradise. Paradise, Kaya learned, could feel like a beautiful prison when the bars were made of expectations and painted with false smiles. The invitation had arrived on cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, the Coral Gables Country Club annual charity gala. Kaya had found it on Brock's desk 8 months into their marriage, and when she mentioned it over breakfast, his reaction had been swift and cutting. "That's a very exclusive event, sweetheart," he had said, without looking up from his Wall Street Journal. "The guest list is carefully curated. It's not really your crowd." The words had hung in the air, like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. Not her crowd. What did that mean, exactly? That she wasn't wealthy enough? Educated enough? The right shade of sophistication for his precious circle? "I'm your wife," Kaya had said quietly, her coffee growing cold in her hands. "Doesn't that make it my crowd too?" Brock had finally looked at her then, his grey eyes holding the kind of patient condescension usually reserved for children who didn't understand why they couldn't have candy for breakfast. "Of course it does, baby. I just thought you might be more comfortable sitting this one out. These events can be overwhelming, as if she were some delicate flower who might wilt under the pressure of making small talk with Miami's elite. As if she hadn't grown up navigating the complex social dynamics of her neighborhood, or excelled in college, or built a successful career in marketing before Brock had swept her away from it all. But that had been 8 months ago. And since then, Kaya had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of Brock's world with increasing skill. She had attended dozens of charity galas, gallery openings and dinner parties, always perfectly dressed, always smiling, always careful to laugh at the right moments and speak only when spoken to. She had become an expert at swallowing her opinions when conversation turned to topics that made her skin crawl. Casual racism disguised as concern about neighborhood changes, classist assumptions about those people who didn't summer in the Hamptons, Tonight's event was typical of the circuit they now traveled, a fundraiser for childhood literacy held at the Perez Art Museum, where Miami's wealthy gathered to write checks that would ease their consciences while they sipped champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Kaya had chosen her outfit carefully, a navy Diane von Furstenberg dress that was elegant without being flashy, her natural hair styled in a sleek updo that Brock had specifically requested. "You look beautiful," he had said as they arrived, his hand possessive on the small of her back. "Just remember what we talked about." What they had talked about was a list of conversational topics to avoid: politics, social justice, anything remotely controversial, and approved subjects to embrace: art, travel, mutual acquaintances. Kaya had memorized it like lines for a play she never auditioned for. The first few hours had passed smoothly enough. Kaya had complimented wives on their jewelry, listened politely to stories about European vacations, and smiled until her cheeks ached. But as the evening wore on and the champagne flowed more freely, the conversations grew bolder, the masks slipping just enough to reveal the ugliness beneath. "I just don't understand why they have to make everything about race these days," Victoria Castellanos was saying to a small group of women clustered near the silent auction display. "I mean, we're all Americans, aren't we? Why can't we just focus on that?" Kaya felt her jaw clench as murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. She caught Brock's eye across the room and saw his subtle shake of the head, a warning to stay quiet, to not rock the boat. "Well," said Margaret Rothschild, a 70-something socialite whose family had built their fortune in real estate, "I think it's wonderful that Brock found himself such an exotic beauty. Very progressive of him." Exotic. The word hit Kaya like a slap, but the women around her nodded as if this were a perfectly reasonable thing to say about another human being. She wasn't a person to them. She was an accessory, a statement piece that proved Brock's modern sensibilities. "Oh, yes," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "and she's so well behaved too. You hardly notice the difference at all." The difference. As if Kaya's very existence required explanation, as if her presence in their rarefied world was an anomaly to be tolerated rather than welcomed. She felt her hands tremble slightly as she set down her champagne flute, the crystal making a sharp clink against the marble table. "Excuse me," Kaya managed, her voice barely steady. "I need some air." She walked quickly toward the museum's terrace, her heels clicking against the polished floor with increasing urgency. Behind her, she could hear the women's laughter, not cruel exactly, but dismissive, as if she were a child who had excused herself from the adult table. The Miami night air was warm and humid, carrying the salt scent of Biscayne Bay and the sweet fragrance of jasmine from the museum's gardens. Kaya gripped the terrace railing and tried to steady her breathing, willing herself not to cry and ruin the carefully applied makeup that had taken her an hour to perfect. "There you are." Brock's voice behind her was tight with irritation. "What are you doing out here? The Castellanos were asking about you." Kaya turned to face her husband, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in months. His perfectly styled hair, his custom-tailored tuxedo, his practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. When had he started looking at her like she was a problem to be managed rather than a wife to be cherished? "Did you hear what they said about me in there?" she asked quietly. Brock's expression didn't change. "I heard some women making small—" "Oh, talk! Why? What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" Kaya's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "They called me exotic, Brock. They said you hardly notice the difference, as if my being black is something to be overlooked or excused." "You're being too sensitive," Brock said dismissively. "Victoria's family has been friends with mine for decades. She didn't mean anything by it. Too sensitive." The words echoed in Kaya's mind like a judgment she was tired of hearing, too sensitive when someone complimented her natural rhythm after she'd simply swayed slightly to the jazz quartet. Too sensitive when countless microaggressions accumulated, like poison in her bloodstream while Brock stood by and said nothing. "I needed you to defend me in there," Kaya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I needed my husband to stand up for his wife." Brock sighed, running a hand through his hair in the gesture she had once found endearing. Now it just looked impatient, as if her feelings were an inconvenience disrupting his evening. "Kaya, these people are important to my social circle. I can't afford to make enemies over every perceived slight. You need to learn to pick your battles." Perceived slight? The words came out sharper than she intended. When is it ever going to be real? Enough for you, Brock? When they use actual slurs, when they burn a cross on our lawn. "Now you're being dramatic," Brock snapped, his polished facade finally cracking. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes things difficult. You can't expect me to fight battles that don't need to be fought." Kaya stared at her husband, this man who had promised to love and protect her, who had sworn under the stars that she was his everything, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. The romantic haze that had sustained her through 2 years of dating and 12 months of marriage finally cleared, leaving behind a stark and painful clarity. "You're ashamed of me," she said quietly, and it wasn't a question. Brock's silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with everything he wasn't saying and all the denials that never came. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully modulated, as if he were delivering a prepared statement to the press. "I think we should go home. We can discuss this privately." But as they made their way back through the museum, collecting their coats and saying their polished goodbyes, Kaya knew there would be no discussion. There would be explanations about why she had misunderstood, justifications for why his reputation had to come first, and gentle suggestions about how she could better navigate his world. The drive home passed in silence, Miami's glittering skyline, reflecting off the windows of Brock's Tesla like a beautiful lie. Kaya watched the city she loved blur past and wondered when she had stopped recognizing herself in the mirrors of their penthouse, when she had traded her voice for a seat at a table where she would never truly be welcome. As they pulled into their building's parking garage, Brock finally spoke. "Tomorrow night is the Hendersons' anniversary party. I need you to be ready by 7, and Kaya—" He turned to look at her, his eyes holding a warning she was learning to read fluently. "I need you to be perfect. Perfect, whatever that meant, in a world where her very existence seemed to be an ongoing apology for taking up space she hadn't earned." Chapter 3. The Birthday Betrayal. Betrayal, Kaya discovered, had a taste, bitter and metallic, like blood in your mouth after being punched by someone you trusted completely. Their first wedding anniversary should have been a celebration of love conquering all, a testament to the promises they had made under the Miami stars 2 years ago. Instead, it had become the stage for the most humiliating night of Kaya's 28 years of life. Brock had spent weeks planning the party, transforming their Aventura penthouse into a showcase of understated elegance. White orchids cascaded from crystal vases, champagne chilled in silver buckets, and a string quartet played softly in the corner where their baby grand piano usually stood alone. Everything was perfect, from the catered hors d'oeuvres to the carefully curated guest list of Miami's most influential couples. "This is important, Kaya," Brock had reminded her that morning as she dressed in the bedroom of their penthouse 30 floors above Biscayne Bay. "The Castellanos are coming, the Hendersons, everyone who matters in this city. I need you at your absolute best." Your absolute best. In Brock's language, that meant invisible. Beautiful enough to reflect well on him, charming enough to make small talk, but never so vibrant or opinionated that she might overshadow his performance as the perfect host. Kaya had learned this choreography over the past year, though each time she performed it, a little more of her authentic self seemed to disappear. She had chosen her outfit with military precision, a champagne-colored Halston dress that complemented her skin tone without being too bold, Stuart Weitzman heels that added height without making her tower over the other women, and her grandmother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry Brock hadn't replaced with pieces he deemed more appropriate for their lifestyle. The early part of the evening had unfolded exactly as planned. Guests had arrived in waves of designer clothing and practiced smiles, filling their home with the kind of conversation that danced carefully around anything meaningful. Kaya had played her role flawlessly, complimenting wives on their Botox and listening to husbands explain various ventures with the expression of rapt attention Brock had coached her to perfect. But at 9:30, everything changed. Everyone. "I'd like you to meet someone very special," Brock announced, tapping his champagne flute with a silver knife to get the room's attention. "This is Tessa Vale, and she's going to be helping us with some exciting new marketing initiatives." Kaya felt her breath catch as a woman stepped through their front door like she was walking a red carpet. Tessa Vale was everything Miami Beach aspired to be: platinum blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, surgically enhanced curves poured into a white Hervé Léger bandage dress, and the kind of artificial perfection that graced magazine covers and billionaires' yachts. At 24, she was 4 years younger than Kaya and had clearly spent considerable time and money becoming a living embodiment of every male fantasy. The response from their guests was immediate and telling. Men straightened their ties and sucked in their stomachs. Women assessed her with the cold calculation of generals studying enemy territory. But everyone, without exception, was mesmerized. "Tessa's been working with some of the biggest developers in South Beach," Brock continued, his hand settling possessively on the small of Tessa's back in a gesture that made Kaya's stomach clench with recognition. "She's brilliant with social media strategy and influencer partnerships. Exactly what we need for future projects." Kaya watched her husband's face as he introduced this perfect stranger who had somehow earned her way into their anniversary celebration, and she saw something that made her blood run cold. Brock was looking at Tessa Vale the way he used to look at her, with hunger, with pride, with the expression of a man who couldn't believe his good fortune. "It's so wonderful to meet everyone," Tessa said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent. That added to her charm. "Brock has told me so much about y'all, and this penthouse is absolutely gorgeous. You have such exquisite taste." The compliment was directed at the room in general, but Tessa's eyes never once found Kaya, as if the actual mistress of the house was invisible or irrelevant. "Oh, Tessa's being modest," Victoria Castellanos gushed, clearly already smitten. "Have you seen her Instagram? 3 million followers. She's worked with everyone, the Kardashians, all those Real Housewives. She's absolutely brilliant." As the evening progressed, Kaya watched her anniversary party transform into Tessa Vale's coming out celebration. Guests who had barely acknowledged Kaya's presence all year suddenly couldn't tear themselves away from the young woman who monopolized conversations with stories about celebrity clients and luxury brand partnerships. Men who had treated Kaya with polite indifference hung on Tessa's every word, and their wives seemed equally enchanted by this perfect specimen of purchased beauty. "She's absolutely stunning," Margaret Rothschild whispered to her friend Eleanor. Price, not caring that Kaya was standing close enough to hear every word. "Can you imagine looking like that at 24? That's what good genes and better plastic surgery can do." "Well, she's certainly an upgrade," Eleanor replied with a meaningful glance toward Kaya. Some men know when to trade up, if you know what I mean. Trade up. The words hit Kaya like ice water in her veins, but worse was watching Brock's reaction, or rather his complete lack of reaction. Her husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her, stood less than 10 feet away and didn't say a word as his guests openly speculated about replacing his wife at his own anniversary party. Instead, Brock seemed to be reveling in the attention Tessa was drawing to their event. He followed her around the room like an eager puppy, refreshing her champagne, introducing her to guests as if she were visiting royalty, and laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't particularly funny. Every gesture screamed of a man trying to impress a woman who was decidedly not his wife. The final humiliation came when James Henderson, fortified by too much champagne and encouraged by the evening's atmosphere, raised his glass and called for the room's attention. "I think we should toast Brock's excellent taste," he announced with a drunken grin. "Not just in real estate, but in, well, let's just say some investments appreciate better than others." The room erupted in laughter and knowing looks. Glasses raised in a toast that celebrated Brock's wisdom in choosing Tessa over the woman who actually lived in this penthouse, who had shared his bed for the past 12 months, who had believed his promises about forever. Kaya stood frozen in her own living room, surrounded by people she had spent a year trying to please, and felt completely alone. Her husband was across the room, basking in the admiration for his new investment, while she had apparently become the depreciated asset everyone was too polite to mention directly. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice barely audible over the continued laughter and conversation. No one noticed her leave. Kaya walked through her own home like a ghost, past the bedroom where she had spent countless mornings choosing outfits that might finally win approval, past the kitchen where she had practiced making Brock's favorite breakfast until it was perfect, past the study where she had abandoned her own career ambitions to support his. In the foyer, she paused at the mirror where she checked her appearance every morning before facing the world as Mrs. Brock Whitman. The woman staring back at her was immaculately dressed, perfectly made up, and absolutely heartbroken. When had she started looking so small? When had her smile become this brittle mask that never quite reached her eyes? Behind her, the party continued without interruption. Her absence had gone unnoticed, her husband's attention completely captured by a 24-year-old Instagram model who represented everything Kaya could never be. Young, white, surgically perfected, and apparently willing to play whatever role Brock required without the inconvenience of having her own opinions or feelings. Kaya grabbed her purse and keys from the foyer table, noting absently that Tessa's laughter could be heard clearly from the living room. It was bright and musical, the kind of laugh that sounded spontaneous even when it was performed for an audience, the kind of laugh Brock used to treasure in her before it became too loud for his sophisticated world. The elevator ride down. 30 floors felt like a descent into hell, each floor marking another level of humiliation she had endured in the name of love. By the time she reached the parking garage, Kaya's hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip her car keys. Miami's streets blurred past as she drove east toward Little Haiti, muscle memory guiding her toward the only place in the world where she had ever felt truly safe. The city lights that had once seemed magical during her early dates with Brock now felt like witnesses to her failure, each gleaming tower a reminder of a world that had never really wanted her. Her mother's house appeared like a beacon in the darkness, modest, welcoming, real in a way that Kaya had forgotten existed. The same yellow walls, the same hibiscus blooming despite the late hour, the same front porch where Imani had warned her about men whose eyes didn't match their words. Kaya sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the home where she had learned what love actually looked like. imperfect, complicated, but genuine in a way that required no performance. Inside that house lived the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise two daughters alone, who had worked multiple jobs to afford their education, who had loved them fiercely without ever demanding they become someone else to deserve it. The front porch light came on before Kaya could even get out of her car, and Imani Nouvelle appeared in the doorway wearing her favorite robe and an expression of infinite understanding. "Come here, baby girl," her mother said simply, and Kaya finally allowed herself to fall apart. Chapter 4. The Matriarch's War. Counsel. In the sanctuary of her mother's arms, Kaya remembered that some women are born with steel in their spines and fire in their hearts, and she was the daughter of such a woman. The sun was rising over Little Haiti when Kaya finally finished telling her mother everything. They sat on Imani's front porch, wrapped in her grandmother's quilts, watching the neighborhood wake up around them. Children walked to school with backpacks and bright futures. Elderly men tended small gardens with the patience of those who understood that growth took time, and women hurried to jobs that might not pay enough but demanded respect for honest work. This was Kaya's world. Had always been her world before she'd been swept away by promises of something better. But sitting here in the pre-dawn quiet, she realized she had never needed better. She had needed different, and she had paid for that difference with pieces of her soul. "That man showed you exactly who he is," Imani said quietly, her voice carrying the wisdom of 60 years spent navigating a world that didn't always welcome strong black women with open arms. "Question is, baby girl, what you gonna do about it?" Before Kaya could answer, the screen door opened, and Aliyah emerged with 3 cups of coffee and an expression that could have melted steel. At 30, Kaya's younger sister had inherited their mother's fierce protectiveness and their father's quick temper, combined with a law degree from University of Miami that made her a formidable opponent to anyone foolish enough to cross the Nouvelle women. "I've been up all night thinking about your situation," Aliyah announced without preamble, setting down the coffee and settling into the circle they had formed. "That man has been systematically destroying your self-worth for months, and now he's parading his replacement around like she's some kind of prize. We're not letting this stand." Kaya stared at her sister, feeling the first spark of something that might have been hope. "What are you talking about?" "Revenge," Aliyah said simply, "but not the kind that makes us look bitter or crazy, the kind that proves exactly what he threw away." The revelation hit Kaya like a physical blow. Not only had Brock humiliated her publicly, but he had apparently been planning her replacement while convincing her that she was the problem. Every expensive gift, every lavish party, every time he had made her feel guilty for questioning their dynamic, all of it had been designed to keep her compliant while he auditioned her successor. "I want to destroy him," Kaya said quietly, surprised by the venom in her own voice. Imani and Aliyah exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes without words. Then Imani smiled, not the gentle, nurturing expression Kaya remembered from childhood, but something sharper and infinitely more dangerous. "Baby girl," her mother said slowly, "revenge is a dish best served by successful women who have nothing left to prove to men who never deserved them in the first place." Over the next hour, as the Miami morning grew hot and humid around them, Imani made phone calls. Not the casual conversations of friends catching up, but the kind of strategic communications that happened between women who had spent decades building networks of mutual support and protection. The first person to arrive was Luna Cruz, a 67-year-old retired federal judge whose silver hair and grandmother's face disguised a mind sharp enough to have sent 3 corrupt politicians to prison. She embraced Kaya like a favorite niece and settled into one of Imani's porch chairs with the grace of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms. "I've known your mother since we were both young and stupid enough to think we could change the world," Luna said with a wry smile. "Turns out we were right, just took longer than we expected." Bella Reyes arrived next, a 63-year-old former Miami City councilwoman whose successful real estate business had made her wealthy enough to spend her 60s traveling the world and funding scholarships for underprivileged students. She was followed by Sofia Martinez, whose chain of boutique gyms had revolutionized fitness culture in South Florida, and Aria Santos, a wellness coach whose client list included celebrities and politicians seeking both physical and spiritual transformation. These women, ranging in age from 60 to 67, represented decades of accumulated wisdom, resources, and connections. They had survived divorces, betrayals, discrimination, and personal tragedies that would have broken weaker spirits. More importantly, they had emerged from those battles stronger, wiser, and absolutely unwilling to watch another woman be diminished by a man who had forgotten her worth. "Tell us what happened, Mija," Sophia said gently, settling into the circle. They had formed on Imani's front porch. Kaya recounted the previous evening's humiliation, watching as these powerful women's expressions grew progressively darker. By the time she finished, Aria was practically vibrating with righteous anger, and Bella was making notes on her phone with the efficiency of someone planning a military campaign. "First things first," Luna said with the authority of someone who had spent 30 years making life-changing decisions. "You need to understand that this isn't about revenge, it's about reclamation. You're not trying to hurt him, you're trying to remember who you were before he convinced you to be smaller." "The Miss Miami pageant," Imani announced suddenly, her eyes bright with possibility. "Applications are due next month. Final competition is in 8 months." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Miss Miami wasn't just a beauty pageant. It was a platform that launched careers, opened doors, and provided winners with a year of appearances, sponsorships, and opportunities to advocate for causes they believed in. More importantly, it was exactly the kind of high-profile, impossible-to-ignore statement that would force Brock and his entire social circle to confront Kaya's worth. "I haven't modeled since college," Kaya protested weakly. "I don't have the connections, the training, the—" "Child, please," Arya interrupted with a laugh. "You think any of us got where we are by having everything handed to us? You have something more valuable than connections. You have us." Over. The next 2 hours, the women laid out a plan that was both ambitious and achievable. Sophia would handle Kaya's physical training, designing a regimen that would strengthen her body while respecting her natural curves. Arya would work on her mental and emotional preparation, helping her develop the confidence and presence that judges looked for in a winner. Bella would leverage her connections to secure sponsors and professional coaching. Luna would provide legal advice and ensure that Kaya's interests were protected throughout the process. "What about coaching?" Kaya asked. "Professional pageant training costs thousands of dollars." "Honey," Imani said with a smile that reminded Kaya why people had always been slightly afraid of crossing her mother. "You're looking at 5 women who have been coaching successful women for decades. We know things those expensive consultants never learned." Aaliyah had been quiet during most of the planning, her laptop open as she researched and fact-checked everything the group proposed. Finally, she looked up with an expression of fierce satisfaction. "I found something interesting," she announced. "Miss Miami 2023 was stripped of her title 6 months ago for violating her contract. The pageant organization is desperate to rebuild their reputation with someone who represents authentic beauty and genuine character. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't just about entering a competition. It was about seizing an opportunity to redefine what Miss Miami could represent. Instead of another Instagram model with a purchased smile, they could offer someone real, someone whose story would inspire rather than intimidate. "That son of a bitch," Bella muttered, her usual composure cracking as she thought about Brock's timing. "Language, mija," Sophia chided gently, though her own expression suggested she was thinking far worse things. "No," Kaya said suddenly, standing up from her chair with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. "She's right. He is exactly that, and I'm done letting him make me feel small." The women looked at her approvingly, recognizing the moment when defeat transformed into determination. This was why they had come, not just to offer support, but to witness the birth of something powerful and dangerous, a woman who had finally decided to stop apologizing for taking up space. "Miss Miami," Kaya said firmly, looking around the circle of faces that had become her war council, "let's make it happen." Imani stood and embraced her daughter, and in that moment, Kaya felt something click into place, not just the decision to compete, but the understanding that she had never been broken, merely convinced to act as if she were. These women, her mother's chosen family, were going to help her remember who she had always been underneath the performance of being Brock's perfect wife. 8 months, Luna said, already making mental notes about timeline and logistics. "It's ambitious, but not impossible. Nothing worth doing is ever easy," Arya added, with the wisdom of someone who had transformed her own life multiple times. As the group began to disperse, each woman taking on specific responsibilities for Kaya's transformation, Imani pulled her daughter aside for a private moment. "Baby girl," she said softly, "this is going to be hard. Not just the competition, but everything that comes after. You ready for that?" Kaya looked back at her mother's house, the place where she had learned that love didn't require perfection, where strength was measured in endurance rather than a submission, where women raised each other up instead of tearing each other down. "I'm ready, Mama," she said, and for the first time in 12 months, she meant it completely. The war for Kaya's soul was about to begin, and she was no longer fighting alone. Chapter 5, Metamorphosis Begins. Transformation, Kaya learned, was not a gentle process. It was the violent and beautiful act of becoming who you were always meant to be. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., and for the first time in months, Kaya Whitman woke up with purpose burning in her chest instead of dread. 3 days had passed since the war council on her mother's porch, and her new life had already begun with the relentless precision of a military operation designed by women who understood that excellence was not negotiable. Sofia Martinez had not been exaggerating when she promised to revolutionize Kaya's relationship with her body. The gym session that morning was unlike anything Kaya had experienced. Not the mindless cardio and restriction she had attempted during her marriage, but a comprehensive program designed to build strength, confidence, and the kind of presence that commanded attention from across a room. "Forget everything you think you know about fitness," Sophia announced as she led Kaya through the private training facility she had built behind her Coconut Grove home. At 65, Sophia moved with the fluid grace of someone half her age, her silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that somehow managed to look elegant. "We're not trying to make you smaller. We're trying to make you powerful." The She workout was intense but intelligent, incorporating dance elements that celebrated Kaya's natural rhythm rather than suppressing it. Strength training that emphasized functional movement over aesthetically pleasing poses, and flexibility work that left her feeling longer and more graceful. By the end of 2 hours, Kaya was drenched in sweat, exhausted, and more alive than she had felt in over a year. "This is just the beginning," Sophia warned as they cooled down with meditation and stretching. Miss Miami isn't one in the gym, but it's definitely lost there. You need to love your body enough to demand the best from it. From Sophia's, Kaya drove directly to Bella Reyes's real estate office in Coral Gables, where her afternoon would be spent learning skills that had nothing to do with fitness and everything to do with commanding a stage. Bella had transformed one of her conference rooms into a makeshift runway, complete with professional lighting and a camera system that would record every step, turn, and facial expression for later analysis. Pageant walking is not fashion walking, explained Naya Delmar, the former Miss Universe runner-up that Bella had flown in from New York specifically for Kaya's training. At 45, Naya still moved like liquid poetry, her presence so magnetic that everyone in the room instinctively turned toward her when she spoke. Fashion models are selling clothes. Pageant contestants are selling dreams, hope, and the possibility that magic is real. For 3 hours, Naya deconstructed and rebuilt everything Kaya thought she knew about walking with confidence. Every step became a statement, every turn a promise, every smile a weapon of mass seduction. It was exhausting work, requiring the kind of precision and repetition that Kaya remembered from her childhood piano lessons. Except now, the stakes felt infinitely higher. "Your husband wants you to be invisible," Naya said during a break, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had navigated similar challenges. "Miss Miami is about being unforgettable. Those two things cannot coexist." The comment hit harder than any physical exercise, forcing Kaya to confront the reality that winning Miss Miami would require her to become everything Brock had spent 12 months trying to eliminate from her personality. The irony was perfect and terrible. Becoming his ideal wife had nearly destroyed her, but becoming his worst nightmare might just save her. Evenings belonged to Dr. Amaya Sinclair, the therapist that Aria had recommended, with the warning that she doesn't coddle, but she gets results. Dr. Sinclair operated out of a converted Art Deco house in South Beach, her office filled with plants, natural light, and the kind of comfortable furniture that invited honesty without demanding it. "Tell me about the woman you were before you met your husband," Dr. Sinclair said during their first session, her pen poised over a legal pad, but her attention focused entirely on Kaya's face. It was a simple question that required Kaya to excavate memories she had buried so deeply they felt like artifacts from someone else's life. The woman who had graduated summa cum laude from Florida International University with a degree in communications. The woman who had started her own freelance marketing business and built a client list through sheer determination and creativity. The woman who had laughed without permission, danced without caring who was watching, and spoken her mind without calculating the social cost. "She sounds incredible," Dr. Sinclair observed when Kaya finished describing her former self. "What happened to her?" "She fell in love with a man who needed her to be someone else," Kaya admitted, the words tasting like truth and regret in equal measure. "And now?" Kaya considered the question seriously, thinking about the past 3 days of intensive training, the plans forming with her mother's war council, the gradual awakening of ambitions she had forgotten she possessed. "Now she's pissed off," Kaya said finally, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. Dr. Sinclair smiled for the first time since they had met. "Good. Anger is useful when it's properly channeled. We're going to help you channel it into something beautiful and unstoppable." The therapy sessions became a crucial component of Kaya's transformation, not because she was broken, but because she needed to understand exactly how she had allowed herself to be convinced that she was. Dr. Sinclair had a gift for asking questions that forced uncomfortable realizations. for identifying patterns that Kaya had been too close to recognize, for validating feelings that she had been taught to suppress. Meanwhile, the practical aspects of her Miss Miami campaign were taking shape with military efficiency. Aaliyah had filed all the necessary paperwork and paid the entry fees, securing Kaya's place in the competition 8 months away. Luna was reviewing contracts and ensuring that any potential sponsorship deals would benefit Kaya rather than exploit her. Imani was coordinating schedules and making sure her daughter ate properly between the increasingly demanding training sessions. The most surprising addition to her team came from an unexpected source, Malik Jefferson, Miami's most sought-after hairstylist, who had apparently been following Kaya's story through the city's gossip networks and offered his services free of charge. "Honey," Malik announced during their first consultation at his Wynwood salon, "I've been watching that man try to dim your light for over a year, and I am not here for it. We're going to create looks that celebrate everything he wanted you to hide." Malik was an artist in the truest sense, approaching Kaya's hair like a sculptor working with precious materials. Instead of straightening or relaxing her natural texture, he taught her to style it in ways that were both elegant and authentically her own, protective styles that could withstand the demands of intensive training while looking effortlessly sophisticated. Evening looks that commanded attention without compromising her professional image. And most importantly, a signature style for the Miss Miami competition that would be impossible to ignore or forget. "Your hair is your crown, baby girl," Malik said as he worked, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who had been perfecting his craft for 2 decades. "Time to wear it like the queen you've always been." 3 weeks into her transformation, Kaya was beginning to understand that she wasn't becoming someone new. She was remembering someone she had temporarily forgotten. The woman emerging from this intensive training was stronger, more confident, and infinitely more powerful than the version of herself who had been performing femininity for Brock's approval. But she was also fundamentally recognizable as the girl who had grown up in Little Haiti, with dreams too big for anyone else's comfort. The physical changes were obvious. Her body was becoming leaner and stronger, her posture more commanding, her style more intentional. But the psychological transformation was even more dramatic. Kaya was learning to take up space again, to voice opinions without apologizing, to laugh without measuring the volume first. Most importantly, she was learning to see herself through her own eyes rather than through the reflection of other people's expectations. "You're glowing," Imani observed one evening as they shared dinner at the Coral Gables house, where Kaya had been staying since leaving her marriage. "I feel like I'm waking up from a very long, very strange dream," Kaya replied, realizing as she said it that the metaphor was more accurate than she had intended. The dream of being Mrs. Brock Whitman had required her to sleep through her own life, to remain unconscious of her own worth in order to maintain the illusion of happiness. But consciousness, once achieved, could not be voluntarily surrendered again. As she prepared for bed in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by books, awards, and photographs that reminded her of who she had been before she tried to become someone else, Kaya felt something she hadn't experienced in almost 2 years, excitement about her own future. 5 months remained until Miss Miami, and every day brought new challenges that she was increasingly confident she could meet. But more than that, every day brought her closer to a version of herself that owed nothing to anyone else's approval and everything to her own determination to reclaim the space she deserved in the world. The woman Brock had tried to diminish was gone forever, but the woman taking her place was going to be absolutely magnificent. Chapter 6. The Husband's Desperation. Desperation, Brock discovered, was the unwelcome clarity that arrived when a man realized he had gambled everything on the wrong woman, while letting the right one slip away. The gossip reached Brock Whitman on a Tuesday morning in late February, delivered with the particular relish that Miami's social elite reserved for the downfall of their own. He was sitting in his corner office 30 floors above Brickell Avenue, scrolling through emails that increasingly felt like exercises in futility, when Margaret Rothschild called with news that made his blood run cold. "Darling, you simply must do something about your wife," Margaret purred through the phone, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had always predicted this outcome. "She's entered Miss Miami. Can you imagine? I mean, it's rather ambitious of her, don't you think?" Brock set down his coffee cup with the careful precision of someone trying not to reveal that his hands were shaking. "What are you talking about, Margaret? Oh, haven't you heard? It's all over social media. Kaya's been training with that terrifying women's group from Little Haiti, you know, the ones who think they run this city. Apparently she's been photographed at some very exclusive fitness studios, working with coaches who usually reserve their services for actual celebrities. The transformation is quite dramatic." After Margaret hung up, Brock immediately opened Instagram and searched for his wife's account, which he realized with growing alarm he hadn't checked in months. What he found there made him understand that he had been sleepwalking through the most dangerous period of his life. Gone were the carefully curated photos of charity events and couples' vacations that had characterized Kaya's social media presence during their marriage. Instead, her feed had been transformed into a documentation of female empowerment that was both inspiring and terrifying. Images of intense workout sessions with Sofia Martinez, whose celebrity client list included A-list actresses and professional athletes. Videos of runway training with coaches whose credentials read like a pageant hall of fame. Photos with her mother's war council, women whose collective influence could destroy or elevate careers with a single phone call. But it wasn't just the professional quality of the content that made Brock's stomach clench with dread. It was the woman in the photos. This Kaya was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or lighting, and everything to do with the confidence that radiated from her very soul. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that. She was powerful in a way that made his attempts to diminish her seem not just cruel, but laughably futile. The captions were even worse, because they revealed an intelligence and authenticity that Brock had spent 12 months trying to suppress. Learning that strength isn't about becoming smaller, it's about becoming exactly who you were always meant to be. Thank you, Sofia Martinez Fitness, for showing me that my body is not an apology. Runway. Training with the incredible Anayaelma today. She reminded me that pageants aren't about perfection. They're about showing the world what's possible when women support women. Therapy isn't about fixing what's broken, it's about remembering what was always whole. Grateful for Adramaya Sinclair for helping me find my voice again. Each post had thousands of likes and hundreds of comments from women sharing their own stories of transformation and empowerment. Kaya wasn't just preparing for a pageant, she was building a movement, and Brock was beginning to understand that he had accidentally created exactly the kind of enemy he couldn't afford to have. His phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Saw the news about your wife. This could be a problem for us." Us. The presumption in that single word would have been laughable if the situation weren't so dire. There was no us in any meaningful sense. There was Tessa's ambition, Brock's desperation, and a transactional arrangement that had already cost him more than he could afford. But Tessa was right about one thing. Kaya's transformation represented a threat to everything they had been building together. Over the past 4 months, Brock had liquidated investments, borrowed against credit lines, and spent every available dollar to fund Tessa's career development. Personal trainers, plastic surgeons, wardrobe consultants, media coaches. The expenses had mounted with terrifying speed, justified by Tessa's promises about the opportunities that would open up once she became Miss Miami. "You have to understand," Tessa had explained during one of their early conversations. "Pageants are investments. The winner gets a year of appearances, endorsement deals, social media partnerships. Miss Miami can earn $500,000 easily, and Miss Florida or Miss USA? We're talking about real money, Brock. Life-changing money." It had seemed reasonable at the time, especially since Tessa's beauty was undeniable and her social media following was impressive. But now, looking at Kaya's transformation, Brock was beginning to understand the difference between manufactured appeal and authentic charisma. Tessa was beautiful, but Kaya was becoming magnificent. That evening, he met Tessa at her South Beach apartment, a luxury two-bedroom that he was paying for, to discuss their strategy. She greeted him, wearing a designer workout outfit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, her hair and makeup perfect, despite having supposedly just finished a training session. "We need to step up our game," Tessa announced without preamble. "Your wife is getting serious attention, and some of my usual advantages aren't going to work if she keeps building this authentic empowerment narrative." Brock poured himself a scotch from the bar he had stocked and tried to project confidence he didn't feel. "What do you need?" "More surgery, for starters. I want to refine my nose, get my lips done again, maybe some work on my jawline. Dr. Restrepo says he can make me look like a cross between Gigi Hadid and Margot Robbie." "How much?" $50,000, maybe 75 if we do the full facial reconstruction." Brock nearly choked on his drink. "Tessa, that's what it costs to compete at this level," she interrupted, her voice taking on the sharp edge that appeared whenever her demands were questioned. "You said you wanted to win. This is what winning looks like." Over the next 2 hours, Tessa outlined a transformation plan that would cost nearly $200,000 and include everything from advanced cosmetic procedures to a complete wardrobe overhaul by top designers. She had researched the most successful Miss Miami contestants from the past decade and identified the specific characteristics that judges seemed to favor. "It's all about the investment," she insisted, showing him spreadsheets on her laptop that projected potential earnings from a Miss Miami win. "We'll make it back in the first 6 months of appearances and endorsements." But as Brock listened to Tessa's presentation, he found himself thinking about the woman he had seen in Kaya's Instagram posts. His wife hadn't spent a fraction of what Tessa was demanding, yet her transformation was undeniably more compelling. There was something authentic about Kaya's journey that no amount of money could purchase or replicate. "What if we can't afford all of this?" he asked carefully. Tessa's expression shifted, revealing the calculating intelligence that she usually kept hidden beneath her breathless southern charm. "Then we'll lose. And honestly, Brock, I'm not sure I can afford to be associated with a loser right now. My brand is about success, luxury, winning. If you can't provide that..." The threat hung unspoken but clear. Tessa's loyalty was contingent on his ability to fund her ambitions, and his access to her depended on maintaining the lifestyle she had come to expect. It was a business arrangement, masquerading as romance, and Brock was beginning to understand that he was the only one who had been confused about the nature of their relationship. That night, alone in the penthouse that increasingly felt like a mausoleum of his failed marriage, Brock stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. 12 months ago, he had been married to a woman who loved him unconditionally and living a life that made him one of Miami's most envied men. Now he was emotionally bankrupt and tied to a woman who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone to her own success. The worst part was that he was beginning to remember why he had fallen in love with Kaya in the first place, not the diminished version of herself that she had become during their marriage, but the vibrant, intelligent, passionate woman he had met at that charity gala 3 years ago. The woman who had challenged his opinions, made him laugh until his sides ached, and brought a warmth to his life that he hadn't even realized was missing. That woman was emerging again, stronger and more beautiful than ever, and she was about to become his competition in a contest where losing would mean more than just public humiliation. If Kaya won Miss Miami, she would have a platform to tell her story, their story, to an audience that would include everyone who mattered in his professional and social circles. Brock poured another scotch and stared at his reflection in the dark window, seeing a man who had traded everything real for something artificial and was about to pay a price he couldn't afford. The game was changing, and for the first time since this all began, he wasn't sure he knew how to win. Chapter 7. Rising Phoenix. Rising. From ashes, Kaya learned, was not a metaphor. It was a daily choice to become fire instead of smoke, light instead of shadow, everything instead of nothing. By April, the transformation was undeniable. Kaya stepped out of Sophia's gym in Coconut Grove with the kind of confidence that made strangers stop mid-conversation and turn to watch her pass. 4 months of intensive training had sculpted her body into something powerful and graceful. But, more importantly, it had restored her relationship with her own strength. She no longer apologized for taking up space or dimmed her energy to make others comfortable. "You're ready for the next phase," Sophia announced as they completed what had become their daily ritual, a 2-hour session that combined strength training, dance, and mental conditioning. "Your body is strong enough for anything those judges can demand, but more than that, you're moving like a woman who owns the ground she walks on." The change was visible in every aspect of Kaya's presentation. Malik had created a signature look that celebrated her natural beauty while establishing her as unmistakably elegant and modern. Her hair, styled in protective patterns that honored her heritage while commanding attention, had become her calling card. Fashion designers were beginning to reach out, offering to dress her for events in exchange for the association with her growing brand. "Honey, you're becoming a movement," Malik observed during one of their sessions, stepping back to admire the intricate braided crown he had created. "People aren't just following your Miss Miami journey, they're finding their own power through watching yours." It was true. Kaya's social media following had grown from a few hundred friends and family members to over 60,000 women who found inspiration in her daily posts about self-love, authenticity, and the courage to reclaim space that had been surrendered to others' expectations. Her content had evolved beyond pageant preparation to encompass broader themes of female empowerment, mental health awareness, and the beauty of becoming exactly who you were meant to be. The engagement was unprecedented for someone who had never been a public figure. Comments poured in from women sharing their own stories of transformation, thanking Kaya for permission to take up space, for reminding them that their worth wasn't determined by other people's comfort levels. Major brands had begun reaching out about potential partnerships, recognizing that Kaya represented something authentic that couldn't be purchased or manufactured. "You're not just preparing for Miss Miami anymore," Dr. Sinclair observed during one of their weekly sessions. "You're building a platform that could outlast any title. How does that feel?" "Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure," Kaya admitted. 6 months ago, I was apologizing for existing. Now I'm building something that could impact thousands of women's lives. The psychological transformation had been as dramatic as the physical one. Kaya had learned to identify and interrupt the thought patterns that had allowed her to accept diminishment as love, to recognize her own worth independent of external validation, and to trust her instincts after months of being told they were wrong. Dr. Sinclair's therapy had become less about healing from trauma and more about preparing for the responsibility that came with influence. Meanwhile, Naya's runway training had evolved into something approaching artistry. Kaya no longer walked. She commanded space, told stories with her movement, and projected the kind of presence that judges remembered long after other contestants had faded from memory. "Miss Miami isn't one on the runway," Naya explained during one of their sessions, "but it's definitely lost there. You need to make them believe that you're not just competing for a title, you're claiming what was always yours." The most surprising development had been the formation of unexpected alliances. Luna's connections in the legal and political worlds had opened doors that Kaya hadn't even known existed. Bella's network was providing sponsorship opportunities that would fund her Miss Miami campaign without requiring any creative financing. Aria's wellness coaching had attracted attention from lifestyle brands looking for authentic ambassadors. But it was the growing community of women who had formed around Kaya's journey that provided the most meaningful validation. Letters arrived daily from women who had left toxic relationships after watching Kaya's transformation. Social media messages poured in from mothers who were teaching their daughters about self-worth using Kaya's posts as examples. Professional women reached out to share how Kaya's confidence had inspired them to demand better treatment in their own careers. "You're changing lives," Aaliyah observed during one of their weekly strategy meetings at Luna's Coral Gables office. "These women aren't just following your pageant journey, they're using your story to rewrite their own." The attention was both humbling and motivating. Kaya understood that she had stumbled into something much larger than personal revenge or even pageant competition. She had become a symbol of what was possible when women refused to accept diminishment as the price of love, when they chose authenticity over acceptance, when they decided their worth was not negotiable. The responsibility was immense, but it was also liberating. Every day brought new opportunities to use her platform for something meaningful, to transform her personal pain into collective empowerment, to prove that rising from betrayal was not just possible, but beautiful. 3 months before Miss Miami, Kaya received an invitation that crystallized everything she had been building toward. The Miami Women's Foundation wanted her to be the keynote speaker at their annual luncheon, an event attended by hundreds of the city's most influential women, including many from Brock's social circle. "This is it," Luna said when they received the invitation. "This is your moment to control the narrative, to show them exactly who you've become." The luncheon was held at the Perez Art Museum, the same venue where Kaya had been humiliated 8 months earlier, where she had been dismissed as exotic and well-behaved. But the woman who walked into that space in June was unrecognizable. From the one who had fled in tears, Kaya wore a custom dress designed by a young black artist from Overtown, a flowing creation in deep emerald green that celebrated her curves while projecting professional authority. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo that incorporated traditional braiding techniques with modern elegance. Every detail had been chosen to honor her heritage while announcing her arrival as a force to be reckoned with. The reaction from the audience was immediate and electric. Women who had ignored her for months suddenly couldn't take their eyes off her. The transformation was so complete, so stunning, that even her former critics found themselves applauding as she approached the podium. 6 months ago, I sat in this very room and learned a painful lesson about the difference between being tolerated and being valued, Kaya began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the space. I was told I was exotic, well-behaved, hardly noticeable. I was treated like an accessory to someone else's life rather than the author of my own story. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But I want to thank those women who taught me that lesson, because they forced me to ask a question that changed everything. What if the problem wasn't that I was too much, but that I was trying to be too little? She paused, looking out at faces that ranged from admiring to uncomfortable to absolutely mesmerized. For too long, women have been taught that love requires us to become smaller, quieter, more convenient for other people's comfort. But I've learned something important. The right people, the right partners, friends, opportunities will love you more as you become more yourself, not less. The applause that followed was thunderous, and Kaya could see women throughout the audience wiping away tears. She had spoken directly to experiences that most of them had lived, but few had ever heard articulated so clearly. After the speech, the response was overwhelming. Women lined up to speak with her, to share their own stories, to ask for advice about reclaiming their own power. Business cards were exchanged, collaborations discussed, friendships formed. But it was Victoria Castellanos who provided the most satisfying moment of the afternoon. The same woman who had called Kaya well-behaved 8 months earlier approached her with obvious discomfort and something that might have been shame. "Kaya," Victoria said carefully, "I owe you an apology. The things I said before, they were wrong. Watching your transformation, hearing you speak today, you're remarkable. You always were, and I'm sorry I couldn't see it." Kaya studied the woman who had once dismissed her, feeling none of the anger or vindication she might have expected. Instead, she felt a profound sense of peace, the kind that came from knowing that other people's opinions, good or bad, no longer had the power to define her worth. "Thank you for saying that, Victoria," Kaya replied graciously. "We all have blind spots. The important thing is learning to see more clearly." As she left the museum that afternoon, Kaya's phone was buzzing with messages, interview requests, and collaboration offers. The local news stations wanted to cover her Miss Miami campaign. National magazines were interested in her story. A major publisher had reached out about a potential book deal. But more than the external validation, Kaya felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing she had reclaimed not just her own power, but had given permission for other women to do the same. The scared, diminished woman who had fled this same building 8 months ago was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that her authenticity was not a compromise, it was her superpower. That evening, as she prepared for bed in her childhood room, Kaya looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone she had never quite been before. Not the girl who had grown up in this house, not the woman who had been married to Brock, but someone entirely new and entirely herself. Etiu. Phoenix had risen, and she was more magnificent than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined possible. In 2 months, she would walk across the Miss Miami stage and claim the title that would cement her transformation. But tonight, she knew that she had already won the only competition that truly mattered, the one for her own soul. The woman, looking back at her from the mirror, was powerful, authentic, unbreakable, and absolutely ready for whatever came next. Miami had witnessed her fall, but they were about to witness something even more spectacular, her complete and total resurrection. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. The truth about desperate men, Kaya learned, was that they became dangerous not when they had nothing to lose, but when they realized they had already lost everything. The first sign that Brock's world was collapsing came on a sweltering Tuesday in May, exactly 2 months before Miss Miami, when Aaliyah burst into Kaya's morning workout session with news that would have been satisfying if it weren't so ominous. "Emergency situation," Aaliyah announced breathlessly, having clearly run from her car. "I just got a call from someone at the Fontainebleau. Tessa Vale was supposed to show up for her preliminary Miss Miami interview this morning, but she never appeared. Word is spreading that she's completely disappeared from Miami." Kaya paused mid-squat, sweat dripping down her face as she processed this information. She'd been expecting something like this. Her own success was becoming increasingly public and impossible to ignore, while Tessa's artificial perfection was beginning to show cracks under scrutiny. "What do you mean disappeared?" Sophia asked, setting down the resistance bands she had been adjusting. "Gone," Aaliyah replied grimly. "Apartment cleaned out, social media accounts deleted, phone disconnected. It's like she never existed. And here's the interesting part. Apparently, Brock has been calling everyone in Miami looking for her. He's completely unhinged." The irony was perfect and terrible. Brock had destroyed his marriage chasing after an Instagram fantasy, only to discover that fantasies disappeared when reality became inconvenient. Every dollar spent on Tessa's enhancement, every public humiliation he had inflicted on Kaya, every moment of their relationship he had sacrificed, all of it had been for a woman who vanished the moment things became challenging. That afternoon brought confirmation of what everyone had suspected. The Miami social media circuit was buzzing with gossip about Tessa's mysterious departure and Brock's increasingly erratic behavior. Stories emerged of him showing up drunk at restaurants where he and Tessa used to eat, of him making scenes at boutiques where he had bought her clothes, of him calling her former associates and demanding information about her whereabouts. "This could actually work in your favor," Luna observed during an emergency strategy session at Imani's house that evening. "The story writes itself. Woman rises from the ashes of her husband's betrayal while he falls apart chasing illusions. It's compelling, and more importantly, it's true." But Kaya was beginning to understand that desperate men didn't always make rational choices, and a man facing public humiliation and complete emotional devastation might be willing to take risks that put everyone around him in danger. The risks became apparent the following week when Tessa's replacement arrived at Kaya's training session. The woman introduced herself as Celeste Ravenna, claiming to be a consultant hired to help with Miss Miami preparation. But everything about her, from her too-perfect appearance to her probing questions about Kaya's schedule and training routine, screamed of someone gathering intelligence for Brock. "We tried to handle this professionally," Celeste announced, during what was clearly a rehearsed speech, "but you've left certain parties no choice. Your public success is causing complications for people who have invested heavily in alternative outcomes." Kaya looked around Sophia's gym, noting that several other women had stopped their workouts to watch this confrontation. These weren't random gym-goers. They were part of the network that had formed around Kaya's transformation, and their presence felt both protective and potentially volatile. "What exactly are you threatening me with?" Kaya asked calmly, though. Her heart was racing. "Not threatening," Celeste replied with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Simply informing you that certain individuals have documentation of your marriage that might be embarrassing if made public. Private moments, personal conversations, intimate details that your growing fan base might find interesting." The words hit Kaya like ice water in her veins. The violation implied in Celeste's threat was so profound that for a moment she couldn't process it fully. Brock had apparently been documenting their private life, recording their intimate moments, collecting material that could be weaponized to destroy her reputation and her Miss Miami campaign. "That's illegal," Sophia said flatly. stepping closer to Kaya in a gesture of protection that was both touching and insufficient. "Prove it," Celeste replied with practiced indifference. "By the time any legal proceedings resolve, Miss Miami will be over and the damage will be done. Your inspiring story of empowerment becomes a cautionary tale about women who reach too high above their station." Kaya felt the familiar sensation of the world tilting around her, the same disorientation she had experienced during the worst moments of her marriage when reality shifted to accommodate someone else's version of truth. But this time, something different happened. Instead of shrinking into herself, she felt her spine straighten and her voice find its power. "Get out," she said quietly, but with such authority that even Celeste took a step backward. "Miss Nouvelle," Celeste began. "Get out!" This time, Kaya's voice carried the accumulated strength of 6 months of transformation, the backing of women who had taught her to value herself, and the fury of someone who had finally learned the difference between love and manipulation. "And tell whoever sent you that if any private material is released without my consent, I will destroy them completely. Not their reputation, that's already gone. Not their social standing, that's already finished. I will destroy whatever pathetic excuse for a soul they have left." The threat hung in the air like a promise, and something in Kaya's voice must have convinced Celeste that she was absolutely serious. After a moment of tense silence, the woman left without another word. But that evening, alone in her childhood bedroom, Kaya allowed herself to feel the full impact of what had just happened. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been secretly documenting their most intimate moments with the intention of using them as weapons, if necessary. The violation was so complete that she found herself questioning every memory of their relationship, wondering what else had been performance and what had been genuine. The phone call came at midnight, waking Kaya from restless sleep. "It's over." Brock's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, defeated, carrying the weight of someone who had finally reached the bottom of a very deep fall. "Tessa's gone. Left with some tech billionaire she met online, took everything I gave her and disappeared like I never existed." Kaya sat up in bed, processing this information while trying to maintain emotional distance from the broken man on the other end of the line. "The recordings," she said simply. "Destroyed," Brock replied immediately. "There never should have been recordings. That was Christ, Kaya. I don't even recognize the man I became. I was so desperate to control the narrative, to protect myself from what I thought you might do, that I violated everything sacred about what we had." "You did violate everything sacred," Kaya pointed out, her voice carrying none of the sympathy that might have been there 6 months ago. "I didn't do that to you. You did that to yourself." The silence stretched between them, filled with everything that had been broken and couldn't be repaired. "I lost everything," Brock said finally. "My wife, my self-respect, my sense of who I am. Even Tessa, who I thought... God, I was such a fool." "Yes," Kaya agreed simply. "You were." "I'm sorry," he said, and she could hear him crying. "I'm so sorry, Kaya. You were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away for something that was never real." Kaya felt a complex mixture of emotions: pity, anger, sadness, and underneath it all, a profound sense of liberation. This broken man on the phone was not her responsibility to fix, not her burden to carry, not her problem to solve. For the first time in their entire relationship, his pain belonged entirely to him. "I know you're sorry," she said gently, "but that doesn't change anything. It doesn't repair the damage or undo the choices or make any of this hurt less." "I know," Brock whispered. I needed you to know that I understand what I lost." After she hung up, Kaya sat in the darkness of her childhood room and felt something settle in her chest. The last tie binding her to the woman she had been during her marriage had finally been severed. Tomorrow she would continue preparing for Miss Miami, but tonight she would mourn the end of something that had never been as real as she had believed it to be. The unraveling was complete, and from its ruins, something far more beautiful was continuing to rise. In 6 weeks, she would walk across a stage and claim a crown that represented not just personal triumph, but the possibility of transformation for every woman watching. Brock's desperate attempts to stop her had only made her more powerful, more determined, more certain that she deserved every bit of success that was coming her way. The phoenix didn't just rise from ashes, she used them as fuel for the fire that would light her way forward. Chapter 9. The Final Countdown. Victory, Kaya understood now, was not about defeating others. It was about becoming so authentically yourself that defeat became impossible. July arrived in Miami, with the kind of brutal heat that turned the city into a shimmering mirage. But inside the climate-controlled sanctuary of the Fontainebleau Hotel, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Miss Miami 2024 was exactly 4 weeks away, and Kaya had entered the final phase of preparation with the focused intensity of an athlete approaching the Olympics. The preliminary interviews had been scheduled throughout the month, giving each contestant multiple opportunities to demonstrate their intelligence, poise, and platform knowledge. Kaya's first interview had been scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the hotel's presidential suite, where 5 judges representing media, entertainment, civic leadership, and former pageant winners would have 20 minutes to determine whether she deserved a place in the final competition. Remember, Naya coached her the night before. They're not just judging your answers. They're judging your presence, your authenticity, your ability to represent Miami on a national stage. You've spent 6 months becoming exactly who you need to be for this moment. Kaya woke that morning with the kind of calm confidence that had become her signature over the past months. Her preparation routine was methodical and meditative, yoga with Arya to center her mind, a light breakfast prepared according to Sophia's nutritional guidelines, and an hour with Malik to ensure that her hair and makeup reflected the powerful woman she had become. The dress she chose for the interview was a custom creation by a young black designer from Overtown who had reached out after following Kaya's journey on social media. The midi-length sheath in deep emerald green celebrated her curves while projecting professional authority, and the subtle beadwork caught the light in a way that suggested both elegance and strength. "You look like a queen," Imani said as she drove Kaya to the hotel, her voice filled with the kind of pride that came from watching someone you love fulfill their potential. The interview panel was intimidating by design. Maria Santos, anchor for Channel 7 News, Dr. Patricia Williams, president of Florida International University, Carmen Rodriguez, a former Miss Florida turned successful entertainment lawyer, Judge Luna Cruz, whose presence on the panel had been arranged through connections that Kaya preferred not to examine too closely, and Isabella Moreno, the current Miss Florida, who would crown the new Miss Miami. "Miss Nouvelle," Maria Santos began after the initial pleasantries, "your platform focuses on women's empowerment through authentic self-expression. Can you give us a specific example of how you would use the Miss Miami title to advance this cause?" Kaya had practiced this answer hundreds of times, but when she spoke, the words came from her heart rather than her memory. 6 months ago, I was a woman who had forgotten her own worth because I had spent so much energy trying to become what someone else needed me to be, she began, her voice steady and clear. My transformation hasn't been about becoming someone new. It's been about remembering who I always was, underneath the performance of being acceptable to others. She paused, looking each judge in the eye, before continuing. As Miss Miami, I would create mentorship programs that connect young women with successful women who can teach them that their worth isn't determined by their ability to make others comfortable. I would partner with therapy organizations to provide mental health resources for women recovering from relationships that diminish them. And I would use every platform available to remind women that their authenticity is not a compromise, it's their superpower. The judges exchanged glances that Kaya couldn't interpret, but she felt the shift in energy that suggested she had given them something unexpected and powerful. Dr. Williams leaned forward, her expression serious. Miss Nouvelle, how would you handle representing Miami if your personal life became the subject of public scrutiny? Specifically, how would you address questions about your estranged husband's recent behavior? It was the question Kaya had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. The temptation was to deflect, to minimize, to protect both herself and Brock from further embarrassment, but that would require her to return to the performance of being smaller than she actually was. Dr. Williams, she said with a slight smile, I think my husband's behavior speaks for itself, and it has nothing to do with my qualifications to represent this city. I married a man I thought I knew, and I learned that people aren't always who they pretend to be. That experience taught me invaluable lessons about the importance of authenticity, the danger of losing yourself in someone else's expectations, and the power that comes from reclaiming your own voice. She paused, feeling the weight of the moment. If Miss Miami can only be held by women whose lives have been perfect, then we're not selecting representatives, we're selecting fantasies. I bring real experience, real growth and real strength to this title because I've earned all three through circumstances that could have destroyed me, but instead made me more powerful. The silence that followed felt electric, and Kaya knew that whatever happened next, she had spoken her truth without apology or compromise. Carmen Rodriguez was the first to speak again. Miss Nouvelle, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing young women in Miami today? The myth that they have to choose between being loved and being themselves, Kaya answered immediately. Too many young women are convinced that their authentic selves are too much, too loud, too ambitious, too confident, too intelligent, too anything. They're taught to diminish themselves to make space for other people's comfort, and in doing so, they rob the world of everything they could contribute. Isabella Moreno smiled for the first time during the interview. And how do we solve that? We change the narrative, Kaya said with growing passion. We celebrate women who take up space. We elevate stories of women who chose themselves over acceptance. We create environments where young girls see that their worth increases when they become more themselves, not less. The interview concluded 20 minutes later with handshakes and professional smiles that revealed nothing about the judges' impressions. But as Kaya left the hotel, she felt the deep satisfaction that came from presenting herself exactly as she was, without apology or compromise. The call came 3 days later while she was in the middle of a particularly intense training session with Sophia. Congratulations, Carmen Rodriguez's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. You've been selected as one of 15 finalists for Miss Miami 2024. The final competition will be held on July 30th at the Fontainebleau Hotel. Kaya sank onto a bench, overwhelmed by the culmination of 6 months of intensive preparation. She had done it. Against every odd, despite every obstacle, through every moment of doubt, she had earned her place on the Miss Miami stage. How do you feel? Sophia asked, wrapping her in a congratulatory hug. Terrified, Kaya admitted with a laugh, and absolutely ready. The final month passed in a blur of preparation that felt both intense and inevitable. Media training to prepare for the increased attention that would come with being a finalist. Final fittings for the competition wardrobe that would tell her story through fabric and design. Strategy sessions with her war council about how to handle whatever surprises the final competition might bring. But most importantly, Kaya spent time with the woman she had become, learning to inhabit her power completely, to trust her instincts absolutely, and to embrace the knowledge that she had already won the only competition that truly mattered. The week before Miss Miami brought a flood of attention that still felt surreal. Feature articles in local magazines about her transformation, television interviews where she spoke about her platform and her journey, social media followers that had grown to over 100,000 women who found inspiration in her story. The support was overwhelming and humbling. Messages poured in from women who had left toxic relationships after watching Kaya's transformation. Mothers wrote to thank her for showing their daughters what authentic confidence looked like. Professional women shared how her example had inspired them to demand better treatment in their careers. On the night before Miss Miami, as she prepared for bed in the hotel suite that sponsors had provided, Kaya looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone who bore little resemblance to the woman who had fled her anniversary party 8 months ago. This woman was strong without apology, beautiful without compromise, and powerful without permission. Tomorrow, she would walk across a stage and claim a title that represented everything she had fought to become. But tonight, she would rest in the knowledge that regardless of what happened tomorrow, she had already become exactly who she was, meant to be. The crown would be wonderful, but it would only confirm what she already knew. She was worthy of every bit of space she occupied in the world. The final countdown was over. Tomorrow, Miami would witness the complete transformation of a woman who had refused to stay broken, who had chosen to rise instead of remain fallen, who had transformed betrayal into empowerment and pain into purpose. The Phoenix was ready to claim her throne. Chapter 10. Queen reclaims her crown. The crown, Kaya realized as she walked across the stage, had never been about the rhinestones and gold. It was about the moment when a woman decided she was worthy of the space she occupied in the world. The Fontainebleau Hotel had been transformed into a temple of dreams and determination for Miss Miami 2024. 1,500 guests filled the grand ballroom, their evening wear glittering under crystal chandeliers, while cameras captured every moment for the live broadcast that would determine not just a winner, but the trajectory of a woman's life. Backstage, in the controlled chaos of hair, makeup, and final preparations, Kaya sat in meditative stillness while Malik put the finishing touches on the look they had designed specifically for this moment. Her hair was styled in an intricate crown braid that honored her heritage, while projecting regal authority, each strand positioned with the precision of someone who understood that tonight was about more than beauty. It was about power. "You ready for this, Queen?" Malik asked, stepping back to admire his work. Kaya studied herself in the mirror and saw 6 months of transformation crystallized into a single moment. The woman looking back at her was strong, confident, beautiful in a way that required no validation, and absolutely ready to claim what was hers. "I've been ready my whole life," she said simply. "I just forgot for a while." The preliminary competition had narrowed 15 women to 5 finalists, and now the final phase would determine who would wear the Miss Miami crown for the next year. Evening gown, interview, and talent, 3 segments that would showcase not just physical beauty, but intelligence, creativity, and the kind of presence that could represent Miami on national and international stages. For evening gown, Kaya had chosen a creation by the same Overtown designer who had made her interview dress, a flowing masterpiece in midnight blue that moved like liquid starlight as she walked. The gown celebrated her curves rather than hiding them, its elegant lines projecting both femininity and power in a way that made the audience intake collective breath when she appeared on stage. Our next finalist, representing the strength and beauty of Miami's diverse communities, please welcome Kaya Nouvelle. The applause was thunderous, and as Kaya walked the length of the stage, she felt the energy of everyone who had supported her transformation. In the front row sat her War Council, Imani, Aaliyah, Luna, Bella, Sophia, and Aria, their faces radiating pride and satisfaction. These women had seen her potential when she had forgotten it existed, and now they were witnessing the full realization of their investment. But it was the broader audience response that told the real story. People were on their feet, applauding, not just her beauty, but her journey, her courage, her refusal to accept diminishment as love. Social media feeds were exploding with support from women who had followed her transformation and found inspiration for their own. The interview portion was where Kaya knew she would either secure her victory or discover that her truth wasn't enough. Standing at center stage under lights that felt like sunshine, she waited for the question that would define this moment. "Miss Nouvelle," the host began, "you've become known for your advocacy around authentic self-expression and women's empowerment. If you could give one piece of advice to young women watching tonight, what would it be?" Kaya took a breath and felt the certainty that had been building for months crystallize into words. "I would tell them that their authentic self is not a compromise," she said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the ballroom. "For too long, women have been taught that love requires us to become smaller, quieter, more convenient for other people's comfort. But the right people, the right partners, friends, opportunities, will love you more as you become more yourself, not less." She paused, thinking about the woman she had been 8 months ago and the journey that had brought her to this stage. "I spent 12 months of my life apologizing for existing, trying to earn love by diminishing everything that made me unique. It nearly destroyed me, but I learned something important. When you reclaim your authentic self, you don't just save yourself, you give other women permission to do the same. And that's how we change the world, one woman at a time, by refusing to accept anything less than the love and respect we deserve." The applause that followed felt different, deeper, more emotional, carrying the weight of recognition from an audience that understood they were witnessing something rare and powerful. For the talent portion, Kaya had chosen spoken word poetry, form that allowed her to tell her story in her own voice without compromise or translation. The piece she had written, titled "Phoenix Rising," chronicled her journey from wife to woman, from diminishment to power, from apology to authority. Standing alone on stage with nothing but a microphone and her truth, Kaya began. "They told me love looked like making myself smaller, like dimming my light so others could shine brighter, like apologizing for the space my dreams required, like gratitude for scraps from tables I helped build. But I learned that love is not subtraction. It is the courage to be addition in a world that demands division, to be multiplication when others insist on fractions, to be the whole. Number when they offer percentages. I'm not exotic, I'm essential. I'm not too much, I am exactly enough. I'm not an apology, I am an anthem. I am not ashes, I am the phoenix that rises from them. And to every woman watching who has forgotten her power, your crown was never lost. It was just waiting for you to remember. That queens are not made by others' approval, but by their own decision to stop bowing. to anyone who cannot see their worth. The silence that followed her final word was pregnant with electricity, and then the ballroom erupted in the kind of standing ovation usually reserved for life-changing performances. People were crying, cheering, and Kaya could see that her words had touched something deeper than competition. They had touched truth. As the 5 finalists stood hand in hand waiting for the final results, Kaya felt a peace that had nothing to do with winning or losing. She had presented herself authentically, spoken her truth powerfully, and demonstrated the kind of strength that could only come from surviving something that should have destroyed her. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, "your Miss Miami 2024 is Kaya Nouvelle." The crown being placed on her head felt like destiny and vindication in equal measure, but it was the sight of her mother's face, radiant with pride and satisfaction, that made tears stream down Kaya's cheeks. As she walked the stage, wearing the crown and sash that represented not just a title, but a platform, Kaya understood that this moment was both an ending and a beginning. Her acceptance speech was delivered to an audience that included everyone who had doubted her, diminished her, or written her off. "This crown isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who has been told she wasn't enough, every woman who has been broken down but chose to rise again. To my mother Imani, my sister Aliyah, and the circle of women who reminded me who I was when I had forgotten, you showed me that a woman's greatest power lies not in trying to fit into someone else's mold, but in being authentically, unapologetically herself." She paused, looking out at the crowd that included cameras broadcasting to thousands of homes throughout South Florida. "We are enough. We are queens. And when we lift each other up, we are unstoppable. Thank you, Miami, for giving me the platform to remind every woman watching that her worth is not negotiable. Her voice matters, and her authentic self is not a compromise. It's her superpower." As confetti fell and photographers captured the moment for posterity, Kaya saw a figure at the back of the ballroom that made her heart clench with complex emotions. Brock stood near the exit, tears streaming down his face, watching the woman he had tried to diminish claim the crown that proved her worth to the world. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and in that moment, Kaya felt the final piece of her healing click into place. She wasn't angry anymore. She was grateful. Grateful for the lessons learned, for the strength discovered, for the journey that had led her to this moment of absolute self-possession. Later that evening, as she sat in her hotel suite surrounded by flowers, congratulations, and offers that would define the next phase of her life, Kaya looked at the crown sitting on the dresser and understood that it represented something far more valuable than a title. It represented the moment when a woman decided she was worthy of the space she occupied in the world. The phoenix had not just risen, she had claimed her throne. Epilogue. 5 years later. 5 years after that triumphant night at the Fontainebleau, Kaya stood in the penthouse office of her women's empowerment organization, looking out at the Miami skyline that had witnessed her transformation. At 33, she had built an empire of self-love and empowerment from the ashes of her former life. The non-profit she had launched during her Miss Miami reign now served thousands of women annually, providing therapy, career development, and mentorship to those recovering from relationships and situations that had diminished their sense of self-worth. Her success had been remarkable by any measure. The organization operated in 12 cities across the country. Her book, Rising: A Woman's Guide to Reclaiming Her Power, had spent 26 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. She had been invited to speak at universities, conferences, and corporate events about authentic leadership and the courage to choose yourself. Major corporations sought her consultation on women's empowerment initiatives. Most importantly, she had found love with Dr. Marcus Williams, a brilliant physician who celebrated every facet of her strength and success. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of authentic partnership that Kaya had once thought was impossible. He loved her not despite her power, but because of it, exactly as she deserved. That evening, at her organization's annual fundraising gala, held with deliberate irony at the same Fontainebleau hotel where she had claimed her crown, Kaya moved through the crowd of supporters, sponsors, and women whose lives had been transformed by programs that existed because she had chosen to rise rather than remain broken. She was adjusting her earrings in the ladies' room when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Kaya!" She turned to find Brock standing in the doorway, looking like a man who had spent 5 years learning hard lessons about accountability, humility, and the cost of forgetting someone's worth. He was thinner, grayer, wearing clothes that suggested modest recovery, but not the ostentatious wealth he had once flaunted. The desperation that had characterized their last interactions was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine peace. "Brock," she acknowledged calmly, noting that his presence didn't trigger the anxiety or anger it once would have. "I've been following your work," he said quietly, his voice heavy with years of regret. "The women you've helped, the programs you've built, the lives you've changed. It's incredible. You've become everything I always knew you could be, and more." She studied the man who had once had the power to make her question her own worth. Seeing someone who had clearly spent considerable time examining his own failures and choices. There was a humility in his posture, a genuine remorse in his eyes that she had never seen during their marriage. "I heard you've been volunteering," she said, referencing reports from mutual acquaintances about his work with organizations that helped men recognize and address toxic behavior patterns. "Trying to make amends," he admitted. "Not to you, I know that ship has sailed, but to the universe, I guess, trying to prevent other men from making the mistakes I made. I spend most of my time now teaching guys about the difference between love and possession, about how to support a partner's growth instead of feeling threatened by it." Kaya felt a complex mixture of emotions, sadness for the time lost, recognition of his growth, and underneath it all, a profound sense of closure that had nothing to do with his apology, and everything to do with her own peace. "Brock," she said gently, "your apology doesn't erase the pain, but I can see your growth. We've both become who we needed to be, just not together. I genuinely wish you well in your journey." His eyes filled with tears at her words. "You were always too good for me, Kaya. I just wasn't mature enough to understand that your goodness wasn't something to diminish, it was something to treasure and protect. I spent years trying to make you smaller because I was afraid of how magnificent you were. I see now that I should have been honored to witness your light, not threatened by it." As she walked back toward the gala, leaving behind the last ghost of her former life, Kaya felt the deep satisfaction of a woman who had not only survived betrayal, but transformed it into purpose. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, who was at the hospital. "Watching the live stream of your speech. You're magnificent, and I'm proud to love exactly who you are." At 33, Kaya had proven that the greatest revenge was not destruction, but transformation, not diminishment, but elevation, not becoming smaller, but becoming everything you were always meant to be. She had built something beautiful from the ashes of her marriage, had helped thousands of women find their own strength, and had created a love story with someone who celebrated her power rather than fearing it. The crown she had won 5 years ago sat in a place of honor in her office, but she understood now that the real crown, the one that mattered, was invisible and unshakable. The knowledge that her worth was not negotiable, Her voice mattered, and her authentic self was not a compromise, but her greatest strength. She had been broken once, but she had refused to stay that way. And in rising, she had given thousands of other women permission to do the same. The phoenix had not just risen, she had taught others to fly.